The Reverend Myra Brown made headlines when she became one of the first African-American women in the U.S. to be ordained as a priest. That was back in 2017. Today, after nearly 30 years in ministry, she continues to champion racial justice work throughout Rochester. Armed with a congregation of 1,500 people, the senior pastor of Spiritus Christi Church is on a mission to help bring racial reconciliation and justice to our community. In a region that has long been called segregated, both racially and economically. What does the work for justice and healing look like today, and what gains are being made? Joining me to discuss this topic and much more about her work is the Reverend Myra Brown, and welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Before we jump in, I understand there are some people, and they're likely scratching their heads, and they're saying, wait a minute, I didn't know the Catholic Church is now allowing female priests. So just to clear that up, I should explain the Roman Catholic Church does not allow women to be priests, but Spiritus Christi is an independent church, and it's one that's not recognized by the Vatican. So I just want to clear that up for people. So when you were first called to the ministry, did you imagine that a day would come when you would be ordained as a priest?
I didn't. You know, I mean, you never know these things. You kind of hear the call from God, and then you say yes, which I did say yes. And then you wait for God to open the doors. And so that's kind of been my life. You know, I remember the day that the first priest, it was actually a Catholic priest who asked me to preach my first sermon. And I said no. And he said, well, don't say no yet, you know, go home and pray about it first. And I was pretty sure I was going to go home, pray about it. God was going to say no, and this guy would get off my back, right? But I did. I went home and I prayed, and to my surprise, you know, I had a really amazing experience, spiritual experience with God, where I was vacuuming and I felt a tug in my shirt. I looked down, there was nobody there. I kept vacuuming, and it happened again, and I knew God was calling me. So I went back to my room, I dropped to my knees, I said, God, are you calling me? And I heard this voice that said, yes, I've called you to teach and preach my word. And I said, you can't. I'm Black, I'm a woman, and I'm Catholic, and they don't do that. But I learned from a very wise godmother of mine that when heaven is silent, because God didn't say anything after that, if heaven is silent, that means God said it, and that settles it. And so I said, fine, if that's what you called me to do, then I need a covenant from you, God. I need you to give me everything I need to do it, and I need you to open the doors for me so that I can walk through them and meet you on the other side. And that's really how I found my call, is walking through the doors that God opened over those many years after that in my life. And I walked through them, and there were new opportunities and additional opportunities that led me finally to Corpus Christi to minister, to be hired as a minister on their team, their pastoral team, for 7 years. And then, of course, we split from the diocese because the church was too inclusive of women and gay people and Protestants. And then, you know, they kicked us out. We started over. God took care of us, and we've been, you know, functioning as an independent Catholic church for 20 years. And even that, so it was actually a couple of years ago that another door opened for my ordination, which is the Roman Catholic Woman Priest movement that's happening. And so I chose a bishop who is a woman from the Roman Catholic Priest movement. She ordained me in 2016, and here I am.
Here we are. You are considered a champion for racial justice in our community, and you lead the racial justice ministry at Spiritus Christi.
Yes.
When you look at where we are in our community racially, what do you see?
Yeah, I see a still pretty divided community around race. I think what I'm encouraged about, though, is I think there's more of an awareness that we have a problem. I think there was a time where we were in, Rochester was in kind of denial, you know. We tout being the place of Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony, but really reluctant to excavate our own history around race and the struggles that we're having. I don't think it's a mistake or it's a happenstance that we are now in a place where just about every place we look, they're struggling. All the school districts are struggling with racism, right? Our economic sectors are struggling with racism. You know, our communities are struggling with racism. The churches are struggling with it. Just about everywhere you look, right? I think racism, it was probably the worst invention of human effort. that has ever happened. And it is an invention. It was constructed, right, by our ancestors. And I think anything that we construct, we have a responsibility to dismantle it. It erodes our humanity, right? It reduces the human spirit in such a way that it takes the essence away from people who are made in the image and the likeness of God. And so I think that the church has a call and a responsibility to address racism. All churches, not just ours.
Talk a little bit about what that work looks like in terms of addressing such an issue like this, one that you said we created. How do we end it?
Yeah. I mean, I think first we have to give ourselves to study, right? If we don't understand its history, if we don't understand its creation, right, its transport to the Americas, and so how that got kind of embedded into our social systems and institutions, then we'll just reduce it to sort of interpersonal conflict, which is part of the problem, I think, in Rochester, where people, when you start to talk about racism, people go to a personal place and like, oh my God, they're making a moral judgment about me. You know, I'm a good person. I'm a good person. But racism is a system. Right? It's a system that was constructed that has embedded in it the belief of racial inferiority and racial prejudice about some groups over white groups, right? And so, and all of our institutional life will in some way attempt to reflect that, right? And so we have to begin to address what's in the institutional structures and in institutional walls. And so how we've begun to do that work is at our church, you know, we looked at where our influences are. And I think that's the first place people have to think, like, where are my influences? Where are my circles of influence? For us, at our church, our influences were our pulpit, right? And the work that we're doing within our church walls, our events, right? And so we looked at those two things first, and our mission, right? And our mission to kind of claim the work. And so for us, we started by realizing that I could not be the only priest and pastor and preacher preaching about racism from the pulpit, right? Because that's where we get to influence 1,500 people a weekend, right? We get to put the message out. And so we had to remind people that anti-racism work really is Jesus' work, right? Jesus' mission was, right, to let the oppressed go free, right? To bring good news to the poor. And so this is not a side dish thing to be working on, but it's central to the mission of Jesus. And so we needed to commit, and we did at our church. All of our preachers, if you come to Spiritus Christi at any given time, we will make sure that the issues of race and oppression are part of the messages that we preach, along with everything else. And then the other thing was we needed to get people trained in the work. I spent a year being trained by Crossroads back in 2005. I came back and I began to train.
And tell me a little bit about that, just in terms of the training, what Crossroads is.
Yeah, so Crossroads is an organization that does racial justice training. I believe they're based in Chicago. And I was asked in 2005 to be on a team of 40 people to work with a Catholic reform organization called Call to Action, which is also based in Chicago. And they realized that they were a racist organization, you know, that their everything that they did really came out of thinking about what the white community wanted, what white culture saw as valuable. And they were wondering why they couldn't get people of color to attend their conference and to participate in their conference. And said, well, because everything that you do here sends a message to the white community that we are here for you. And so they asked us to help them with that. And so they brought in Crossroads and we got trained, right, and for a year in the history of racism in this country and the struggles that white people have with resistance to doing that work, the struggles that people of color have.
And sorry to interrupt, but considering I know 1,500 congregants, and many of them are Caucasian, so how were they? Were they receptive to this, and were they, in terms of the training aspect, I would have to think that not all of them are aware of something such as implicit racial bias and what that means.
They struggled initially. I mean, I think initially, you know, it was kind of, if I got up to preach, it was like, oh, here's the Myra thing, right? And so it was easy to kind of isolate me in it. It wasn't so easy to do once, all of the staff, when, my white colleagues and pastors and preachers joined me in that. And we were fortified. We were together, right, on this, and we were their leaders. And so they began to get it, right? And so it was really helpful to have a team. I think people of color and white people have to do this work together, right, in order to move it, because the system of racism works really hard for us not to have to know and to not give it the attention that it needs. So I think...
Is there an area where you do feel as though, based on the work that you've done, you personally, with the other leaders in the church and with your congregants, is there something that you would say, we are seeing progress, or we feel as though we are seeing change as we really push this conversation forward?
Absolutely. I mean, our parish has done an amazing transformation from when we started this work many years ago. I remember, early on in our journey, even at Corpus Christi, people would come and, we started things like they instituted a gospel choir, right, in this predominantly white church, right? And so we had white members who would sit up front and just put their hands over their ears while the gospel choir was singing. I'd get anonymous notes, that why is that music being sung at our Mass? Why is that person waving their arms in front of our priest, right? We're talking about the white priest, right? And so, why do we have to talk about this? We don't have that many people of color in our congregation. Why do we have to do gospel music? We don't have that many black people in our church. And so it's been a journey that we've walked with each other, and I think it's been important for leaders to stay steady as leaders, right? And because we gave ourselves to the work, we could actually have those conversations, hard conversations with people, right? About equity, right? About justice, right? About humanity, right? About our call to follow Jesus, that it includes all of this, not just the parts of it that we want to pick. And really calling people to the kinship that's in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's really what racial justice work is about.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but before we close, a special thank you to my guest, the Reverend Myra Brown, Senior Pastor of Spiritus Christi Church. And if you want to get involved in the effort to bring racial justice and healing to Rochester through the church's work, go to spirituschristi.org.